Hello and welcome to the Rum Revival. It's Arminder here, and today I'm featuring 4 rums from 4 different parts of the world. And look, one of the reasons that I really love rum so much is that it's made all over the world, and it's made in all sorts of different ways, and it tastes all sorts of different ways. And I just realized that's 3 different reasons, not just one, but hey, the more the merrier, I guess, right? So today, what I'm gonna do is taste and talk about these 4 single cask releases from Roaming Road Spirits. Now, full disclosure, Roaming Road Spirits, who is an independent bottler, they sent these bottles over to me. I didn't ask me to make a video or anything like that, but I tasted through them and I thought, okay, it'd be kind of fun to maybe do something with these. So that's what I'm doing. I'm making a video. But yeah, just wanted to kind of disclose that, I didn't pay for these, so keep that in mind as you're watching the video. So here's what we have in the lineup. We have a 11-year-old Thailand rum, a 12-year-old rum from Mauritius, another 12-year-old rum, this time from the Dominican Republic, and then a 17-year-old rum from Spain. When was the last time you had a rum from Spain? I guess if you live in Spain, maybe a lot, or if you live kind of near Spain, maybe you've had a decent amount of it. But here in the US, we don't tend to get a lot of rums from Spain. So this was the rum that I was the most excited about when I heard about this lineup, when I received these bottles. I have thoughts on all of them, so what I'm going to do is obviously taste through them, share some tasting notes, and kind of give you my general thoughts on each of them. All right, so let's start off with the 11-year Thailand rum. So this is a molasses-based rum made by Sangsum Distillery. It was column distilled and then aged 11 years in once-used ex-bourbon barrels. Now, of the 11 years, 6 years were in Thailand, and then the remaining 5 were somewhere in Europe. Oh, and of course, I forgot the ABV. It's bottled at 59.5% ABV. And let's give this guy a smell. So what I get is notes that would seem fairly kind of quote-unquote traditional, like baking spice, caramel, maybe a little bit of brown sugar. But that baking spice is a very kind of dry baking spice. Though I think baking spice, by definition, by its nature, is dry, but it just feels particularly dry, or evokes this, doesn't evoke any kind of lush baked good so much it evokes dried spices. And the caramel itself as well here is not a rich caramel, it's like a dry caramel. And then I also get, once you let this open up a little bit of berry. I don't have a specific berry in mind. Well, it's definitely not like a blueberry or a strawberry, blackberry, raspberry, maybe, I don't know, but just more of a dark berry note. Let's use that. Yeah, let's go with that. Anyways, let's give this a taste. Cheers. So I get initially a little bit of like a spiced caramel, a little kind of faint smoky clove, maybe. There is a earthy kind of spice note here, not full on turmeric, but kind of evoking some of that. So I think this has a really kind of nice push-pull because there's some notes here that evoke more of a lush richness, caramel richness, but then there are a lot of these other notes like the dry clove, the turmeric, the drier notes that kind of balance some of that out. And somewhere there, kind of faintly in the background, there is like this faintest, slight bitter, slight acrid thing, which is a nice juxtaposition against that kind of caramel richness. But yeah, I think this has enough contrast here in terms of notes that it keeps things engaging and interesting and enjoyable. Sipping rum. It's not something that's gonna like wow you with the flavor profile of something you've never had. Yeah, I think this is what we would call solid, rock solid rum. That wasn't code for anything. That was just me itching my ear. So let's move on to the Mauritius here. Mauritius is a small island country out in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Madagascar. And here, this is a cane juice rum from Medine Rum Distillery. I think they've been producing rum in Mauritius since 1926. This is column distilled. That cane juice is column distilled. It is aged 12 years, 8 of which are at origin in ex-bourbon, and then 4 years in Europe where it's finished in a cognac cask. Now, in terms of ABV, it's 63.7% ABV. And if you're curious, Medine is a distillery that makes Penny Blue, which is a brand which I haven't seen a whole lot of here in the US. I have seen bottles for sure. I don't know if I've seen any new bottles come out in the last couple of years, so I don't know if they had like a push a couple of years back and there's just some bottles floating around. So this one to me evokes, and might be because of the changing of the season, at least as a time of recording, we're kind of getting into, at least where I live, kind of a fall vibe in terms of weather and other things, but this kind of has like a bit of a fall aroma, or it's kind of evoking some of those notes. I'm getting fig, you know, I think that's maybe more useful than just fall aroma. Yeah, there's fig, but there's also some brightness, I think, from some citrus, like there's a little bit of a citrus pop. All right, cheers. First thing I noticed just on that first sip, there's a bit of a slightly chewy mouthfeel. It's kind of nice, kind of like that. But definitely more, I think, fig on the palate as well. But it's also like there's a richness here as well that's coming from a little bit of chocolate. Yeah, a little fig, a little chocolate, and maybe a little bit of spice to kind of balance some of those richer notes out. You kind of feel a little bit more intensity here. Then the Thai rum, through the magic of editing, I actually added a little splash of water here to kind of open it up since it was feeling kind of intense and a little tight. Yeah, this is, I think, so much better with the water. Proof down a little bit, you know, the 63 point whatever, it's probably a little much. I don't know what I proofed this down to. It was a quick little splash. Chocolate feels a little more, slightly more milk, where before it felt a little dark. That fig now is like a little kind of, I'm gonna say smoky, but maybe a little roasted or something like that. It's kind of really nice. It's a little more chewier now. Yeah, I definitely think it's better with the water for sure. I'll be honest, I don't have enough experience with cognac to tell you how much of the flavors I'm getting are coming from that cognac finish. You know, I wish that's one. Well, there's many areas that I'm deficient in life in general, but specifically in spirits. One especially so is cognac. I have little to no experience with it outside of like cognac aged or finished rums, frankly. So I don't know how much of what I'm getting I can feel like is clearly and obviously coming from the cognac cask. I don't know. I think though it is also again another rock solid rum. I don't know if that's like a rating or not, but that's kind of the best way to describe it, I think, for me at least. So now we're moving on to the rum from the Dominican Republic. This is produced by AFD, or Alcoholes Finos Dominicanos. Apologies on the pronunciation there. It's a fairly new distillery. I think that's been around since 2010. And a lot of the rum that they produce, or some of the rum at least, goes to Barcelo, the brand. But also they make a lot of rum, lightly aged rum, that they sell in bulk as well. This is a cane juice rum. But don't get too excited because it is calm distilled to like around 95% ABV. And anytime a rum or any spirit is distilled to such a high ABV, it strips and removes so much of the flavor created during fermentation and of the source material. So this is not going to taste like an aged like rum agricole or an aged Clarin or anything like that. At 95% plus ABV, it's fairly neutral in kind of flavor when it comes off the still. So all the flavor that we are going to get here is coming from the aging process. It is aged in ex-bourbon casks. It is a 12-year-old rum, 6 years in the Dominican Republic, and then the remaining 6 years in Europe. Oh, and then I keep on forgetting the ABV. Because I didn't write the ABV in my teleprompter, so I'm just reading everything else. But the ABV on the Dominican Republic rum is 56.8. It's also really tough to read that from even here. I'm getting old. Yeah, 56.8. All right, let's give it a smell here. There is a slight cough medicine thing here. How do I even describe this? This is gonna sound weird, but it also smells like the color purple. I don't know. That was just the kind of impression I got. The color purple, not like the movie or the musical. Literally the color purple. It's kind of just what it evoked. Cough medicine and the color purple. I guess maybe what I'm trying to say here is it kind of smells a little bit like grape Dimetapp, maybe. But there is also a little caramel, a little molasses here on the aroma. All right, let's give it a taste. Cheers. I don't know. Okay, so what I was gonna say For a big portion of that sip, it felt very, given the diamond tap of it all, grape cough medicine on the aroma, the palate felt a little more traditional, a little more straightforward, oak, wood, caramel, vanillas and all that. But 3/4 of the way, it did something interesting. I have to take another sip to kind of figure out what that was. So I'd say a lot more vanilla up front here than these two. But I guess there is a turn into a little bit of a slightly odd, burnt, bitter medicine thing, but not the same medicine that I got in the aroma. Like, I liked that. The turn this takes, I'm not loving, don't hate it. In isolation, that kind of bitter, burnt medicine kind of thing, it's very faint. But I do love it in the fact that it's coming after this kind of a little bit more kind of vanilla forward note. It just adds this really nice juxtaposition, adds a bit of a journey on the palate. And I love when that happens, right? It's not one note, right? It's starting to do this and then it kind of does this or does this. I think this is also solid. Maybe not rock solid, but it's solid. If that's, let's make that the rating system for this video here. Rock solid, solid. I just, generally speaking, I'm not the biggest fan of like a vanilla taste in my rum, but I do kind of really like that odd burnt bitter thing. All right, so let's finish on the final rum here, the rum from Spain. Okay, so there's a lot going on here. This is produced by Azucarera del Guarfio Distillery. Apologies on that pronunciation. I am 100% sure I butchered that for sure. Mike at Roaming Road, when he sent this, said that distillery is the only alcohol molasses factory in Spain. I guess what that means is the only factory that's producing molasses that is meant for alcohol as opposed to just making molasses for molasses' sake. Buddy. Anyway, so we know it's molasses based, it's column distilled, and it is aged 17 years. Now, 15 of those years is aged in Spain in ex-bourbon, and then the final 2 years is somewhere in Europe in specifically a Cotswold single malt whiskey cask from the UK. I just realized, I think I said that the final 2 years are aged in Europe, as if Spain isn't in Europe. Buddy. Okay, what I meant by that was that those 2 years are in some part of Europe that is not Spain. Forgot to mention again, ABV on this rum, it is 60.6% ABV. Okay, so I think it's very clear and obvious and apparent on the aroma that this has a whiskey-like aroma. I think those 2 years of aging in that whiskey cask really affected the aroma. But I will say also, for me at least, I get a little bit of rose, or like maybe rose water. In a way, it kind of evokes, if you are familiar at all with North Indian cooking and baked goods, I don't know, dessert, let's say, but it kind of smells a little bit like gulab jamun, right? These really kind of fried, are they dough balls? And I think they use oftentimes rose water, and they come in like a syrup sometimes. And this kind of reminds me a little bit of that. Whiskey and gulab jamun and rose water. Not the worst combination, frankly. Anyways, let's give this a sip. Cheers. Yes, I think this, on that initial sip, has this very strong whiskey note to it. I think it's very clear and obvious. And I've heard that from other folks who've sampled this at festivals or other places. They've tried it and they're like, yo, that's a very strong whiskey note. But I will say this, if all I had was a very small pour of this at a festival, to be fair, or even like a small sample bottle, like a 2-ounce pour somewhere, and I drank it, yeah, I would say like, man, this is pretty heavy on that whiskey influence. But I've had, this much of it, right? Which isn't necessarily a whole lot, but it's more than like a 2-ounce pour. I've had a couple sessions with this. And yes, it's definitely heavy on that whiskey influence. But the more time I've spent with it, the more I've been able to kind of, one, get used to that presence of that whiskey influence, and then start picking up some other things. And for me, that other thing is this kind of boozy, salted caramel note, which is my favorite kind of caramel, if I'm being honest. All that to say that I don't mind the whiskey influence here, even though it is strong, but know that that is coming from someone who doesn't have whiskeys he could drink instead. You know what I mean? Or someone who's kind of well versed in that space. Maybe if I was, I might say like, oh, I'd rather just drink something that's pure whiskey. No, I like the specificity here. But again, that's from someone who doesn't have that specific note elsewhere at his disposal. You know what I mean? Okay, so kind of broadly speaking, I really do think this is an interesting collection of 4 rums here because yes, all 4 very spread out places on the globe, you know, Thailand, Mauritius, Dominican Republic, and Spain, all very different, location-wise, culturally, language, and all that. That being said, in a way, this collection of 4 play sort of in a sort of similar space, right? Like if we were to do some sort of like a cross section of like an x-axis and a y-axis of flavors and all that, I would say these 4 play in one quadrant of the 4 quadrants, you know? Like none of these have like really strong fruity tropical fruit notes or like really strong green vegetal cane grassy notes, you know? All 4 of these to me, their main flavor is really coming, I think, from the aging, right? From barrel flavors, right? And yeah, there are differences for sure, right? Like the whiskey cask aging flavor is, you know, very strong and apparent here. And maybe some of that fig that I'm getting or that chocolate might be coming from the cognac finish here, though, you know, again, I don't have a lot of experience with the cognac. But generally, the space of the oak, wood, caramel, vanilla, brown sugar, molasses kind of flavor wheel profile thing. I think all 4 of them are kind of playing in that quadrant, you know, this quadrant, or is it whatever. So like, I think to me, if I had to rate these, rock solid, solid. And then for me, this is kind of pretty rock solid, but asterisk because I think, you know, your mileage may vary, right? One, if you don't like that whiskey note, you're not going to like this rum, I think, right? And if you have a lot of whiskey on hand, then I get where you're coming from. Like my whiskey should taste like whiskey and my rum should taste like rum. Get it. But if you don't have that, I think you might be like intrigued to have a rum or a spirit in your collection that gives you some of that flavor. This is very specific. All right, so that's it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. If you were curious, this is some sort of like weird frog thing. And yeah, catch y'all later. Cheers.